Right on. So, welcome. So we got a good variety. We got Maine, we've got some locals, we got some not so locals, some other locals. And where are you at again?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Okay, cool. I'm in Nashville, but I'm the director of Nazarenes for Creation Care, and I've talked to some of you already. And so we partner with Nazarene Compassionate Ministries to work to resource on a grassroots level churches and Nazarenes around the work of creation care. And so that can either look like theological resources and things like that. We've got a great small group series that does like 5 weeks on creation care. That's really great. There's they've got that at the Foundry. And then, but that can also look like practical resources and things like that. Hey, come on in. Hey. I know, he's well prepared. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about some high-level stuff today, and then draw it down just briefly, and then draw it down into sort of the nitty-gritty of the contextual issues of creation care. And I'd love to hear about you guys' context and questions you have, and that we would just take time to talk together, and you know, however that needs to flesh out. So a couple other quick resources I'll throw your way. This is my book. I brought a couple if anybody wants one. But it did just come out audiobook recently, which is exciting. My wife was like, you better plug the audiobook. So there it is. And then this is a podcast that I help host that we're having just ongoing conversations about this kind of stuff. So, but there are a lot of great resources similar to that. You guys, they showed this video in chapel, so I'm not going to belabor that. But this is a really great video, though, that we can share with anyone who wanted to show this in their congregation. If you were in the service this morning, it's kind of like an introductory 3-minute video that just walk through some scriptures and sort of introduces the idea of creation care. So we kind of created this video in order for people to kind of show this to their congregations and kind of open up a conversation. So I can send anyone the link to that. It's on our YouTube page for Nazarenes for Creation Care. So, hey, come on in, brother. So today we're talking about becoming a Nazarene Eco-Church, an exploration into trash dishes and the reconciliation of all things, because everything matters, right? I like to say all matter matters, and every belonging belongs to our God. So, I'd like to just kind of get a pulse today where everyone's at in the way of creation care. What sort of comes to mind when you guys hear the term creation care, or how would you define the term creation care? Like what sort of bubbles to the surface for you?
Depends who's saying it.
Okay, yeah, true enough. It depends who's saying it. Yeah. I find that outside of church circles, when you say the term creation care, people are like, they don't even use the term creation. It's yeah.
You get the idea of the tree hugger kind of concept.
Yeah, sure. Tree hugger, yeah. Yeah, what else comes to mind? Anything? Recycling compost, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Stewardship. There we go. That's what's up.
Well, when I think of creation care, I think of Genesis.
Right? Genesis. Absolutely. So that's our starting point. Yeah. Yeah, anybody else? What comes to mind for you? Plants.
Farming, agriculture.
Yeah.
Sustainability.
Yeah. I love that. A lot of good stuff.
I think of freeing nature to grow. So, as I said, I hate bittersweet. And I always feel like when I pull the bittersweet up and move it from the branches, it's like I'm rescuing these trees.
Yeah.
And I really love these trees.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that framework because it is so much about removing obstacles in order to let God's creation do what it wants to do already. It's kind of a way. Yeah, I see your hand. Oh, back there. Yeah.
Yeah. it makes me think of, or I want to believe that it will be clean water and oxygen for my grandchildren.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think of the word that comes to mind for me is responsibility. Like it's
Mm.
not an obligation, but it is a very big responsibility for
Yeah.
Christians to.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Really great.
I'll go with some random, I guess it's alliteration in my mind, but I think of redemption, rescue, and what's my other R word? I had one. Shoot. Rescue, redemption, and renew. Renewal.
There's lots of great R words when it comes to creation care. They're out there. Yeah. Yeah. There's like this, the recycle, reuse, reduce, and then there's the Christian one, which is like redeem, reconcile, resurrect. Yeah, love that. Okay, cool. I want to dig in a little bit more, and I thought it would be good. Let me just open with this scripture for us here, and this is probably one that you're familiar with. This is from the Apostle Paul out of Colossians. But he writes, he, Jesus, that is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on heaven or on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. It's the word of the Lord. I'm going to throw a question you guys' way that was recently thrown to me in the interview setting, but I'm just curious. It's kind of a theological question, I guess. But what do you guys think the reconciliation of all things is? Like, what is that about? Any thoughts on that?
Reconcile means to account for.
Okay.
Everything back in order.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what's one of my fallbacks, is when I wonder what does something mean, I can the dictionary.
Yeah. Yeah, anybody else?
Make me think of like we're going back to the paradise, to the garden.
Okay. Yeah.
Reconcile everything like
Sure.
in the beginning.
Yeah, totally.
At the same time, I agree with that. When I hear reconcile, like not only do I think of going back to the beginning, but I think of in Revelation, where John talks about the new heaven and new earth, like coming together.
Yeah.
The new Jerusalem coming down. That's kind of what I think about, like, I don't know if you can say like progressive reconciliation.
Sure.
Like not just looking back to the way things used to be,
Right.
looking
But
forward to
where
the way
we-
things should
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Like
Where we're going.
front,
Yeah.
Where we're going for that. So
Yeah. That's
the
right.
garden is a beautiful image,
Mm.
but also I think the heaven that we're looking forward to as well,
Yeah.
where we're going, is also good.
The fulfillment, heaven and earth. Yeah. Totally. Absolutely. I love talking about that, and one of the sort of phrases that's thrown out, it's like that God isn't about making all new things, but about making all things new, right? And there's actually this cool word that is often used in the Old Testament in the Hebrew, and a lot of the prophets use it when you see renew, is actually the same root word we get new moon from. And I kind of love that because it's this idea, it's like you're every 28 days, right? You're not getting a new moon, you're getting the same moon again. And it's just sort of, image that's just kind of imprinted in there that we kind of get. So
What's the word?
that's what I was trying to remember. Like all Hebrew words, I'm looking at 3 consonants in my head and I can't pull it out. It'll come. Yeah. Right on. So yeah, I'm gonna walk through a little bit of content and then kind of get into more of the nitty gritty with you guys today. So Earth, am I right? So good. We care for creation because, kind of like we were talking about, it's a big part of our biblical story, a big part of who we are as the people of God. And all throughout Scripture, as you kind of probably saw in that video, these scriptures popping up, right? It's threaded throughout, but we just maybe don't talk about it a whole lot, at least as much as we should. And so I bet if we were to take a poll here about how many people grew up hearing even a sermon on creation care, right? It's not something that's just that common. But I love thinking about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the blue marble image. It's sort of a famous satellite image that astronauts took back in the day, but it's just this idea of seeing the Earth from space and realizing there's no borders, there's no lines, like we are all here on this planet as part of this one ecosystem and this one planet. And I think that's a helpful sort of framework for us even to consider conversations around earth care and creation care, that we're part of God's elaborate creation, inseparable from everything else. And so I think there's two important points that would be helpful to kind of highlight. First off, is that ecological well-being is human well-being as God created it to be. And you read that and you're like, oh, yeah, of course, right? But this is a really important sort of point that just sort of undergirds what it means to be the people of God on planet Earth, right? That you can't separate those things. And then the next one is that we are created for earthly stewardship, as he mentioned, as we reflect God's image within creation. Now, John Wesley talked a lot about this kind of thing, right? A lot about the image of God. He talked about the political, what he would call the political image of God, and it's about how we wear a body and live in communities in the earth reflecting God's image. And so these are just kind of base level good points for us as Christians to think about. One of the other things, obviously, you mentioned Genesis. I love talking about the Genesis narratives. There really is so much in there, and too often what happens is we kind of get a little bit of a felt board version when we're young, and then we don't kind of get back there as adults. But there's so much there, and I like to talk about, if you've read any of the Hebrew, right, and you see in Genesis chapter 2 that God creates the Ha-Adam, the human, from the Adamah, the ground. And when you really see the words, you see how like this from this. And it's just a beautiful creation poem that both science and scripture verifies, right? That we are people of the earth, made of earth. And we've got nitrogen and hydrogen and all the things that make up the rest of creation make us up as well. And I think it's helpful. I love this quote by Norman Wiersbe, he's an agrarian eco-theologian out of Duke. He writes, human beings are always dependent for their life on the fertility and fecundity of soil, which in turn is dependent on the breath of God for its animation, right? Because that ultimately is what made us human, is that God breathed life into us. And so love that. So we are people filled with God out of the soil, created to be here. We don't happen to be here. We're designed to be here. And I think that's important to consider. And so we're connected to creation in all sorts of ways that we're still finding out, like we're still discovering. And so on the other side of this coin, what this means for us then is that at the base level to talk about and to understand is that you can't separate loving your neighbor from loving and taking care of creation, right? There's no means to separate those two things. Like we're talking about clean water, clean air for our children, and we can't overconsume and exploit and trash the earth and destroy God's creation and turn around and say that we love our neighbors or that we love God who created it all. And so I think, again, it's kind of like, yeah, but it's important to say, and these are words that aren't said enough in our congregations. Thomas Aquinas talks about dominion, and he says we have to frame dominion through charity, right? Through the works of love, right? Not domination. And further, our Christology informs us of what dominion is. I know that's I just throw that in there because that's one of those words that has gotten hijacked from Genesis a little bit, right? It's dominion, not domination. We have some fun pins floating around somewhere at our table. Wendell Berry, if you've ever read Wendell Berry, if not, you should. Amazing man. He writes, the ecological teaching of the Bible is simply inescapable. God made the world because he wanted it made. He thinks the world is good and he loves it. It is his world. He has never relinquished title to it. He has never revoked the conditions bearing on his gift to us of the use of it that oblige us to take excellent care of it. If God loves the world, then how might any person of faith be excused for not loving it or justified in destroying it? Good question, Wendell Berry. One other quote I'll share, or a couple more real quick. We are now God's stewards. We are indebted to God for all we have. A steward is not at liberty to use what is lodged in his hands as he pleases, but as his master pleases. He is not the owner of any of these things, but barely entrusted with them by another. Now, this is exactly the case of everyone with relation to God. We are not at liberty to use what God has lodged in our hands as we please, but as God pleases, who alone is the possessor of heaven and earth. Anybody know who said this? This was John Wesley. So you can read the whole sermon, Sermon 51, online. It's great. It's the Good Steward. A couple other quick quotes. H. Ray Dunning, I know many of you guys should be familiar with him. He says, as a tradition that emphasizes sanctification in terms of the image of God, Wesleyan theology should stand at the forefront of movements to exercise responsible stewardship of the environment. It's so good. There's another workshop happening right now talking about stewardship, but they're not talking about this. What are they talking about? Money. Yeah. And so stewardship of everything, right? Because the world isn't just money, which honestly may be a good description of how we got here, that we've made it all about the money. So I love how he frames this, though, because I think stewardship is a great sort of way in with your congregation to talk about more of these things. And one more, got to throw in some wine coop. She talks, for Wesley, as God heals us and calls us into holy living, it becomes the beginning of the integration of all personal life, which then reaches out to social life and to the world and finally to the earth itself. So I think the Church of the Nazarene, man, we have some great theological framework already at large to grapple with earth care and a lot of the environmental issues that are happening today. And so I hope that, just these few slides encourage you guys to dig more into that. And I write a lot about that in my book, Garbage Theology, and then our small group series and other resources. These are great ways to sort of just ease this conversation into your congregations or small groups or however it is. But there's so much out there in our tradition for this work. I want to share a few slides that, are probably depressing, just because I think sometimes we, maybe more often than not in the church, that we don't really name a lot of what's going on in God's creation. And we definitely don't give enough space to grieve, which honestly is step one with creation care, in my opinion, is finding and providing space for our people to grieve a lot of what's going on. Today, it's no secret that there's so much brokenness in creation. There's so much that's not going well, right? Heat waves, The last over the last 20 years, we've had, I think, the 10 warmest years on record, at least. Coral reefs are bleaching. If you guys have followed any of that, honeybee colonies are collapsing. The rainforest and the Amazon loses just hundreds of acres per day. Right, this is just going on in quote unquote the background. Right, that it's estimated that by 2040 could be the first year without frozen solar caps. A new data recently revealed that Greenland is losing 280 billion tons of ice per year. So we're talking sea level rise. We're talking, migration that we think we've seen migration. We haven't seen migration. All of this. Agrarian scientists talk about how we, could have maybe around 60 harvests left. Things like that, these are very, these are very sobering bits of information that there's so much out there. I snipped some news articles as I was scrolling because I wanted to just share some with you guys. Europe experiencing its worst drought in 500 years. That was a little while ago. Flash floods, Texas record summer worth rainfall, glaciers. Where will we end up living as the planet burns? Pakistan floods. Yeah, these are our headlines, right? And the church has to be talking about these things because this is the world we're living in. This is actually one of the craziest ones. This has happened, I think, for the second year in a row now that the fishermen went out to farm and fish for the snow crabs, but there weren't any snow crabs, and they don't know where they went. It's just that Catherine Hayhoe talks about this, who's a climate scientist, Christian. She talks about this like global weirding, right? We could talk about climate change, we could talk about global warming, whatever framework you want to use, doesn't really matter, but the facts are that it's all changing, right? And if you guys are interested, I'd love to get into the science of climate change, or if you have any of that questions like that on the back end. But it's all affected, at the end of the day, what we know is that what we do matters and how we live matters and that our footprint matters. And so creation is groaning. The earth has never been more in need of care. Loving creation is loving your neighbor. So I think that's a helpful axiom, again, to help think about, where we're at. And so that's just sort of a large contextual snapshot that maybe is a bit more doom and gloom than you signed up for here. But it's important to hold that reality at hand when we're talking about what it means to care for the earth, because all of our contexts are different. Especially people in the global south are bearing the brunt of, our overconsumption in the global north. In the global north, we have about 20% of the population, and we use 70% of the world's emissions. And so the balance is tipped. And so, yeah. So what does it mean to love our neighbor here? So I want to get into some of this and love to kind of take questions and talk. There are a lot of churches, denominations, Christians doing the work of creation care more today than ever before. And it's really hopeful and it's really encouraging to see all of these groups of people doing their things. And so congregations are going zero waste, they're composting on their property, they're starting gardens, they're putting in solar panels, they're planting trees and native plants and all sorts of really cool ways. Got guys like Samuel here who at his district assembly, they helped plant, was it 440 trees? They gave out 440 trees at their district assembly in, April? Dude, that's what I'm talking about. That's amazing, right? Rachel here has trained her dog to pick up trash. It is amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. We've got a picture of him at our booth. Yeah, it's true. We all eat it, actually. It's the problem. They actually say on average you probably have about a credit card's worth of plastic inside your body right now. This was a study a couple years ago that they did. Our friends, Nazarenes like Morgan and Arwen, are in Kansas City and Indiana. They're leading their churches in small group series. They're working toward becoming an eco-church. Some of you guys maybe know Tamina, who's a Nazarene in Kent, Washington. And their church had a just giant parking lot that wasn't being used, and they decided that because they had so many refugee families living there without any place to have culturally appropriate food, they depaved their parking lot and put in this giant garden called Hillside Paradise Parking Plots Community Garden. And so now all of these families who had nowhere to grow their food garden there. It's really beautiful. They have, I think it's the biggest rainwater site in like catchment in the state of Washington. It's awesome. They've been on the news and everything. But these are Nazarenes. So it's really cool. And so the ground is moist and ready for us to do more. Let me see. I think. Oh, so here's a good one. We've been podcasting. We did like a season on the Millennial Pastor podcast, and then I ended up starting another one. But these are all Nazarenes. We've been recording stories. These are things that you can listen to. You can share with your congregation. I've got some info at our table out there. But we're trying to collect these stories and share these stories because we're just not hearing about them as much in the Nazarene Church. And so, the irony of it all is it can feel so big. But really, the truth is that every little thing that we do matters. So what I wanted to get to, sort of the main event, I would love to share with you guys and talk a little bit more about our Nazarene Eco-Church program. And what's really cool is we've modeled this after a lot of other denominations who have done this work, and it's been really successful, and even Arasha, which is a global Christian conservation group, has a program like this in the UK that's really great. But basically it's framed like this, where it's just like a 1, 2, 3. And so there are several congregations that are doing this work right now. And I think I've got a certificate over here. This was a church, New Vision Church of the Nazarene, just completed theirs. But basically, it's one, you form a green team. It's almost always your first step to engage your congregation, which is just get with 1 or 2 other people, try to get someone who is on staff, would be ideal, and just say, who cares about this? Let's get together, right? It's always the first step. The second step is sign the Eco-Church Covenant. Now, we have kind of a suggested template for this on our website, and you can even, I think you can digitally sign it. But we encourage congregations to just make it their own as well. And then 3, make 3 changes. And this can take a week, this could take a year, this could take however long. And so there's really no rush, but the goal is to get moving and begin doing something. And so we have a lot of suggestions on our website, but a few here, like your building and facility, right? Receive an energy audit, enhance a recycling program, use real dishes, right? Change your light bulbs, or your grounds or your property, right? Think about a community garden, native species, fruit trees, butterfly habitat. Then think about your liturgy or your education, right? Right, in how you do your services, have a green VBS, offer a small group study, and then in the way that you reach out to your community and are about the work of justice in the world, right? Clean up a stream bed, right? Are you familiar with your watershed around your congregation? And those sorts of things. And you'll find once you begin digging, pun intended, is that there are people already doing this work around you, and there are already organizations. There's already a watershed organization. There's already Interfaith Power and Light, that's an organization around you that's doing this work. So, I want to pause here And I'd love for you guys to maybe, since we're kind of an intimate group, maybe if you'd be willing to just sort of turn around, we could do groups of 2 or 3 or 4 and talk about, one, what stands out to you so far, and maybe what's limping for you here, what's leaping for you here, and where on this spectrum do you feel intersects with your context as far as caring for creation in your congregation or wherever you're at. Does that make sense? So what's standing out for you, and what areas, do you feel like you can move forward on or have questions about, and then just to get things moving a little bit, and then we'll come back and talk for a second. How about that? So I'll give us like 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes.
Pittsburgh area. We're at Waynesburg is an hour south. She's still in Waynesburg?
Interested in doing things the easiest, fastest, cheapest, which turns out to be the most wasteful.
What's being said so far? All of this is where I'm at. Yes. I know my context is southwest Pennsylvania, so. You mentioned creation care, people are that's what liberals do. Right. And
Just been talking
I know
about
my context is like very
the cost of getting rid of the
apprehensive towards this type of stuff. Now, the funny thing is, I became our AD in 19 and now
generated so much more
facilities managing. And so we just started changing lights and go into energy efficient bulbs, and our bills going down. That's amazing. Our bills are going down, and we can be environmentally conscious.
So we looked into it, you have to remodel our whole
Pretty average, like
and get
larger, like, yeah, 200 people. Right. But those large footprint, right, those buildings.
But I do think people do what's easiest.
One thing that I
Especially
so
what's fastest, what's easiest.
we're not, my wife and I are pastors, church planting at the moment, but we don't see ourselves like having an official building.
You can have things delivered.
So, well, one thing that I think we've been invited onto the district to do is kind of help some of the churches see a different way of being a church. And I really like all of this. This was like on our radar to begin with. But I would love to see some churches, because there's a couple in our area that have really large properties. But then it's just all like grass. And so I would love to see.
Don't get me wrong, I love playing sports. I love frisbee. I love.
But like you're designing like a sports area. It's just for yeah. So I would love to see them plant like flowers or plants or like a community garden or something. And I think that the community like we're talking about here would benefit immensely. I'm in Syracuse.
So you said you were brought in.
Yes, no, we were missionaries in the Dominican. The district superintendent. Yeah, Olivia Metcalf. She's phenomenal. Yeah, you should get to know her.
I'm actually talking to
Where are you looking?
Oh, yeah.
I know basically your guys' preaching is exactly cool for
Okay.
I'm in doing with part-time. This is my like outer but so I kind of got into this
All right, let's take one more minute.
We're over the border from here.
Each year it just keeps getting bigger. So that's just being grown. So where you see it go, not only just wants to be free with wise. Let's go.
All right, let's bring it back and let's chat for a minute. Hear what you guys come up with. Troublemakers in the back. It's the Monkerns. Yeah, it's always the Monkerns. Yeah. Awesome. Right on. There's so much to get into here. So I'm curious, what are some of the topics that begin to spring to the surface for you guys as you just kind of begin to where do we start talking about this? So what's kind of jumping out, and what are some of the things you got into?
Is the congregation supportive or not? Is one thing.
That's definitely yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay.
We have in our congregation quite a few older people
Mm-hmm.
that have grown up with, I'll say, the consumer generation.
Yeah, sure.
And they look, well, we're right by D.C., so there's always a suspicion of is
Is
this
it
a good
political?
thing, or
Yeah.
is this a political thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's a really important point for us as the church, an opportunity to be the first to name that, to stand up and say, hey, just FYI, this is not a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. There's no wings involved. This is a Christian thing, and I think just naming anything that we can name like that, even as we walk into the conversation, and pick out some of these key scriptures and say, hey, let's talk about this, and then by the time you get into the details, there's a lot of energy there, I think. But you're absolutely right. What's the pulse on our congregation? What are people already thinking about this that's never been said or named? I think is important. Yeah, what else did you guys get into issue-wise? What are your thoughts?
Question, does Nazarene for Creation Care organize some sort of let's say region or district, or more like global events where we can bring the congregants to participate, experience, get involved,
Yeah.
get in love with creation, then come back to our churches and be a better, more effective, new.
Amen. Come around here. I'm going to give you a hug. Yeah. I just saw Dr. Duarte walking by, so when you see him, you can tell him. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we're trying to do through partnering with NCM and that sort of thing, and we're just trying to get support for that kind of thing. So we're trying to get our foot in the door at a conference next year, but we are currently planning a Creation Care Summit for next summer. The last one we did was in 2019 before COVID, and long story short, some Nazarene pastors in Flint, Michigan invited us to come there, and so we did it in Flint, and obviously that was a great spot. So
you know that we always see on media what other organizations are doing, cleaning the bays, doing this, doing that.
That's right.
And often our own churches go and support those things outside of the Nazarene.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
denomination, and they're when I usually say, hey, you know that we do that too?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
That's
the
right.
media is in front of them, so
Yeah.
it's easy for them just to click and join.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just speaking out of my heart. I think if we all could do much better on not promoting, but allowing everyone in our churches to know.
That's right.
The churches in Nazarene is more than just a Sunday 2-hour service.
That's right. And what so much of this is about, and how I love to talk about it, is really embodying the gospel and putting, we talk about inviting Jesus into our hearts, and we should do that by all means. But, we've got to invite Jesus into our hands and our feet and our head and everything, our whole selves. And then when that happens, your body goes and does things. It puts its hand in the soil. It extends that love, right? And, and that's the being a kingdom of priests and the, blessing to all the earth, Exodus 19 stuff. So get me preaching. Yeah, what else stands out to you guys as you were chatting, as I was talking about this? What's jumping out?
The gentleman that I chatted with, if I'm correct, were something that stood out to them is kind of waste of space and resources.
Yeah.
Available real estate or even things around them, but not being used for potential. Or,
Yeah. Churches have a lot of, we can be quite wasteful when it comes to energy and facility use and, and just obviously talking about trash and things like that. Yeah.
I'll add to that too, because I know my church has been making a lot of changes to our building right now, and even things like we changed office administrators, and so they took down all the old paintings, and all the paintings went in the dumpster. And it's like it seems like my church just loads the dumpster up of like office chairs, everything. Instead of we have a place to donate, literally a place like a mile down the road, but everything hits the dumpster.
Yeah.
And then too, like I'm a dumpster diver, like that's part
totally.
of my passion, and my church hates that because I dive for food as well. That's a whole.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
It's just like that definitely, grinds my gears to use
Yeah.
that phrase, because I'll walk back by the dumpster and I find like stuff back there. I pull it out and drive it to myself, but just this idea of like, well, we need to get rid of it, so in the trash it goes.
Totally.
You could always load it up in a truck or something and then take it to their houses and throw it in the yard.
There you go. Yeah.
What I usually do, because I'm kind of like my brother side there.
Yeah.
I do twice a year a free yard sale.
Mm.
And anything that my church doesn't need anymore, I find places to hide and to keep.
I love that.
And I do a community free yard sale. Come and get anything you want. And I noticed that that opens it up for all type of all kinds of people. Not only what we believe the needy people, but it just opens to conversations with.
That's right.
It's a yard sale, so anyone stops by and they can say hello. Here's the church and whatnot. But,
That's right.
But we don't trash anything.
I love that. That's a no-brainer. We used to do that. We called them free sales, and we had it once a year. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
We do a yard sale too, but what we do is we rent table space for $20.
Yeah.
So people bring all their stuff, but that's all donated.
Yeah,
That's all donated.
right.
We don't keep any of it. And also, we're on a main road, and so our neighbor puts all kinds of stuff out that people can just take for free. So that's easy to do. Just put it outside the road. People will take it if they need it.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's so many creative solutions, obviously, to the waste thing that, on one hand, it provides a really cool opportunity to get into some of the theology with your congregation around waste, and to say that, I don't believe God really likes waste, and that I don't think any creator wants his or her creation to go to waste, right? And that if you think about how creation is, God made and designed creation, right? Everything feeds everything else. And so, right, the leaf falls to the ground, becomes the nitrogen that grows the plant, that becomes the food, that becomes the animal that dies, right? And so it's the Lion King principle, right? The lion eats the antelope, the whole thing. And this is how God designed creation. And only until recent history have we actually stepped outside of that circular design. And, and what does it mean now that we're creating things that don't biodegrade, right? What does it mean now that we're generating so much emissions that we're trapping heat in the atmosphere, right? And all of these systems. And so how do we re-enter that? And how do we as the church be a people who talks about that and leads the way, right, toward regenerative care in the world? And so I love taking that as opportunities to talk about waste. And then, back to the green team thing, it's like all of a sudden you get talking about it and you've got 5 people knocking on your church office door who you didn't even know they had a recycling hobby or were dumpster divers or scrap metalers or all the things, right? Because it's the life we live in. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, what else is standing out to you guys?
I think so. One of the things that we talked about on top of like the waste is even in leading like these initiatives is how do we get past the just moving trash from one place to another? Because that really we need like a cleanup, and it really is just picking it up from one place and it ends up in another.
Right. Yeah.
But that's like kind of a concern that stands out.
Yeah. Well, there's no such thing as throwing anything away, right? Which is sort of the thing underneath the thing that you could probably name, I think, all environmental issues today as an issue of overconsumption, right? A byproduct or consequence of overconsumption. And so you're right. And I think that's another helpful, honestly, like theological framework that we can talk about, which is simplicity, which, and I think that there's a lot to say in the New Testament even around the idea of simplicity and love and how love embodies in a place and simplifies, and that's kind of a whole thing we could get into. But yeah, definitely.
I think it's hard though. Sorry, I'm a little bit of a challenger.
Yeah.
Talking
Sure.
about using real dishes.
Yeah.
We were talking about
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So it means that you have to have a place to store them in a church kitchen. So
That's right.
you may need to redesign that.
That's right.
And you probably need to have a dishwasher.
Yeah.
In order
many.
to sterilize.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they're
Absolutely. And there are reasons why we went away from real dishes in this scenario, right? Originally, because there were 2 or 3 sweet people who got stuck with the dishes every time. And then all of a sudden, and so you gotta retrace that as a congregation, and then you've got to bring up your values, right? And so in our church in Nashville, we were eating, before COVID, we were eating meals every week together. We were cooking. There's a team that got together at 8:30 at the church, cooked lunch, the cooking team, and this was a rotation. And then we had a cleanup team, and then but by the time lunch was over, we got 3 tubs, 1 filled with water, 1 sanitizer, 1 soap, whatever it was, and there was probably 6 or 7 us. Like we didn't even leave until this was done, because this was a continuation of our worship. And we would wash dishes together. Some guys playing the guitar over here, and so you've got to reframe the narrative around these creation care events so that it's not like, geez, the pastor's left with the dishes at the end of the day. It's like, no, this is what it looks like when the people of God come together, and that's easier said than done, but I've seen it done, and it can be really beautiful. Yeah.
I just want to say something on that. I don't know if this would be helpful, but like my wife and I used to be missionaries in the Dominican Republic, and we hosted work witness teams. And early on, we decided that we weren't going to use disposable dishes or utensils, and so we bought like 100 plates from the store and like 200 silverware of each thing, because we had teams come, then they would all use those things. Yeah, that meant we spent time afterwards washing dishes by hand because we didn't have a dishwasher. And it took the hardest part, I think, was not convincing the teams to use these, but it was convincing like our local cooks and our help that this was a good thing instead of, because the easy thing to do would be to buy the disposable plates and things, but it was a constant education piece on our part to them to say, this is why we're doing this, because we care for all of creation. So this is one small, very small thing that we can do to reduce waste. But we also did like leftover days, which was unheard of for a work and witness team. Like for that country.
I love
like
that.
The cook had been a work and witness cook for 30 some odd years, and she always did it the same way every time, and there was a new meal every time because that's what the Americans wanted, right? But we kind of challenged her on that, and again took the time to educate and say we're going to have leftovers because this is a lot of waste otherwise. So it was hard. It was hard. Like to the day we left, we were still like saying, no, we're going to do it this way because it's better for the creation and it's less waste.
Right.
But then like we also said like of a compost bin, which was huge because of all the teams we hosted, but and it took some time, so it wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. It was definitely worth it. And I think by the end, like when we left, we made an impression on her and on them. They even stopped using disposable dishes like in their home as a family. So I think that was worth it for us. But I think I would love to see churches do the same thing. I mean, I met with them like the first day, and then went to go to dinner, right? And all these disposable plates. And I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah. We need a compost for those. I think that's a really great point, and you said it there, is that it's not easy. And I think that could be the motto for almost this whole talk, right? Is that it's going to feel a little bit like you're swimming upstream in a culture that is marked by overconsumption and waste. I will say until these things become just part of our routine and part of our habits and part of our rule of life as Christians, and connecting those dots of like, and to be honest, and I know Sam and I have talked about it some, it's like there are so many, I'm going to say particularly young people, who one of the reasons that they're not engaged with the church today is because the church does not seem to care about these things. And I know personally, and obviously I have strong opinions about creation care, but when I walk into and even see like the styrofoam coffee cups, like I know that there's a certain set of values, that's decisions that have been made, right, to get the styrofoam coffee cups, and I personally really hate styrofoam. I feel like styrofoam actually embodies everything the kingdom of God is not, which is a whole sermon. But I know we're getting close to time, and I'm going to hang out, but I think that there's so much here. A few things that I wanted to, leave with ideas as well is like, think about education as far as like signage in your church goes a long way, right? Just the bins. I remember we did our Creation Care Summit in Flint, and the first thing I did while we were setting up is I ran around the church and got rid of all the trash cans. So there was literally nowhere to throw anything away, and we had told everyone going into the summit that it was going to be zero waste. So if they're bringing something that wasn't recyclable, there was not going to be anywhere to put it in the building, and so it's sort of it's a visual confrontation. Sometimes I kind of forgot I was going to bring the trash can from down in the exhibit hall just so we could kind of see what was in there, because I think these visual aids are good conversation starters. So signage is really helpful. I know we've gone out to the beach lately, and they've got these signs when you walk on the beach that say, "Hey, did you know that a plastic straw doesn't," they've got the how long something exists, which, as we know, plastic doesn't actually biodegrade. It just gets smaller and smaller. And those sorts of things. So One of the things that we've done in our community, I think, is great to think about your facility and space as a location for your community to compost. We've built a compost for our neighborhood, so people can, if they don't want to do it at their house, they can walk across the street to our church grounds or our community garden. Same with glass recycling. Our community doesn't offer that, so we built a thing in our community garden where they can bring their glass recycling. These are just low-hanging fruit ideas, and there's so many of them. One of the things we've done is you can see my friend David repairing a sewing machine there. We've done a repair cafe, which is a great idea. Everyone has piles of stuff in their house that they don't want to throw away because they think they might be able to fix it, but they don't know how. There's probably someone in your church who has a garage who would want to brew some coffee and open up. There are people who do repair cafes, and it's like a thing. There's I talk about this place in Nashville called Turnip Green, and I think every church building could have its own turnip green, and it's basically like they take everything that Goodwill doesn't take, that in the way of just like anything you think, like old CDs or whatever it is, and everything's like just pay whatever you want to donate, and that's their business model. And people come in there, and I'm telling you, people are in that place all the time for art projects and just whatever. Just thinking about what if your church actually had a space for the unbelongings in the world, and we're actively making this into a ministry. So I think that there's so many low-hanging fruits. I had a couple more slides. This was our dish system that we did. Thinking about the products that you use, even your cleaning products in your facility, are they eco-friendly? Thinking about there's a lot of great resources out there for your church's carbon footprint. There's through Arasha, there's what's called Carbon 360, and I can get that resource to anybody, but it's a free resource to help your church assess your carbon footprint and respond. These are my 5 favorite non-Nazarene organizations. Actually, I don't know why Arasha's not up there, but yeah. There's so many resources out there for you guys. This is what we just did with USA Canada, because they're focusing on blessing our community. They sent this out. I don't know how they sent it out. I know they posted online, but we offered some great next steps for congregations to bless their community. Right? So there's so many great resources. We have a newsletter. I'd love if anyone wants to stay connected, hear more about the Eco-Church stuff or whatnot. That's a great way. It's about a once a month hello. So that's all I have. I'm gonna let you guys go because I know it's 1:30. But yeah, last question there.
Are any of these resources in other languages yet?
That's something so I will say that this resource, the Foundry has, I think, working on getting it in some other languages. But that's something we would love to have help on because we're grassroots. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to hang out for anybody who wants to talk more, but I wanted to respect your time. So, thanks.
Thank you. Are you a monitor then? Yeah. Okay. When you said this is what the I knew her a little